thank you again. I'm very excited to be here to also hear that there's an entire class at USF based on Envision and how it can be used to improve infrastructure systems. So I am pleased to provide kind of our introductory to the framework for you today. To kind of kick things off, I wanted to lay a little bit of the groundwork as far as what Envision is and who founded it. So Envision is the product that you think of. It's the framework. It was developed in joint collaboration with ISI, that's my organization, and the Zovnis Program for Sustainable Infrastructure at Harvard. So if we think about ISI, the organization that maintains and advocates for the Envision framework. We're a nonprofit education and research organization. We were founded by these three organizations. So some organizations that you might already be familiar with, or maybe you're members of a student chapter, the American Public Works Association, the American Society of Civil Engineers, and the American Council of Engineering Companies. So these are some of the key players that were there for the development of ongoing development and advocating for Envision, as well as who was there at the founding and continue to be involved. The framework itself, the purpose of it is really to, as you've seen in your introductory materials, to foster this dramatic and necessary improvement for improving the performance and resiliency of our infrastructure systems. I know we were talking before class started, and I'm sorry, do you prefer Professor Trotz, Dr. Trotz? Maya?
Oh yeah, you could call me Maya.
Great. Thank you. I know Maya was indicating that you guys have started looking at some examples of infrastructure where it wasn't planned as well as it could have been. So Envision was developed and launched and published in 2012 to address that need in the infrastructure industry, to say, okay, we can be doing this better, but how? So in today's presentation, I'm really going to introduce you to the Envision framework, but I'm also going to provide some regional relevance. I can share some things that have been going on in Florida, and also share some industry-wide applications. So whether you are in the engineering field, whether you're studying marine biology, you can kind of begin to see where you might find some applications in Envision and how it will help further your career ultimately, knowing about it, that is. So to meet this goal, to kind of fulfill this purpose of this presentation, I'm going to first we're going to talk a little bit about sustainability and what that really means in the context of development and how infrastructure plays a role. From there, I'll introduce and provide a little bit more information about ISI and the Envision framework. And then we'll talk a little bit about implementing Envision, and I have some credit highlights that I'd like to share with you. And I can also keep my Envision guidance manual handy, so if there are credits that interest you, things that you had seen in the manual that you want to talk a little bit more about, I can pop that open, and we can take the conversation wherever it leads us as far as what is interesting to you. And then at the conclusion, we'll talk about some of the next steps and how you can build for future success, not only with this class, but using Envision into the future. So first up, let's talk about and do some brainstorming on what does sustainability mean to you. So if you could please head to menti.com and enter this code. And you can use one-word phrases. You should see 5 boxes that will allow you to input 5 different words or phrases. You can submit more than one response. So head to menti.com and use the code 5057381 and start filling in some answers, and we can see what we're talking about here. Great. Super. So I like that green is front and center. Ooh, community centered. Environmental, that's good. Future progress, a lot that are coming up around future, which is fantastic. Community, a lot that are coming up around community. It sounds like you guys are already well versed in what we think of as the triple bottom line. Equity, excellent, I love that. Prolong. Great, great. Excellent. So we'll pause there. You're welcome to keep inputting notes as you go along. We will eventually pop to the next question as we roll through this presentation. But I wanted to use that interactive brainstorming, if you will, to really kind of lay the groundwork and make sure everybody's on the same page, which it seems like we are with what sustainability is. So when we talk about sustainable development, I really like to think that we're putting some action behind this term sustainability. So when we think about that, this is where the future comes in, that a lot of you indicated in your responses to that last question. So when we're talking about sustainable development, we're looking to the future. And you may have seen this common definition of sustainable development, where it's really meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So regardless of the sector, we can all find some common ground in approaching what's known as the triple bottom line, and approaching sustainable development from the perspective that we really are working for the now and for the future. So with that common definition and kind of everybody being on the same page with respect to that, what is the responsibility of infrastructure? What's the role of infrastructure, and what makes infrastructure unique? So one of the things that makes infrastructure unique is that it's a public asset. It's here, and we build it and we plan for it to provide a public service. There's generally no single responsible entity, and generally it's funded by taxpayers. So all of these things will really feed into how you can best plan for sustainability, how you can best plan for funding, which of course will impact sustainability as well. The other key aspect of infrastructure, or another key aspect for infrastructure, and again, thinking of everybody pointing to the future, infrastructure has a long life ahead of it. So we have to be able to look really far into the future in order to be able to plan for it and in order to be sustainable for the future. So highways could be constructed to last as long as 20 to 50 years, whereas larger infrastructure projects like dams could be more along the lines of a 100-year lifetime. So if sustainability is about planning for the now and planning for the future, we need to be able to predict the future. We need to be able to predict the future and say, okay, what's going to be going on with this community where this dam or where this pipeline resides in the next 100 years. So how do we do that? Spoiler alert. It's the Envision framework. So the Envision framework is what I also like to call the crystal ball. So the Envision framework gives infrastructure industry professionals the tools that they need to ask the right questions and to predict the future. So the Envision framework examines the sustainability and resiliency of infrastructure systems and puts the tools in the hands of the infrastructure industry professionals to build and plan for more sustainable projects. It provides this common language so that everybody knows when we're talking about infrastructure, what does sustainable mean? And really thinking of So thinking back to what does sustainability mean to you, we're already, this class is, a very small pool, and you're also relatively biased in that you have already, you've signed up for this class, you have an interest in sustainability, you have, good education so far as far as what sustainability means and should look like, given the resources and the education that you've received so far in this class. But not everybody is starting from that same page. So if we were to have that discussion more broadly, open it up to the general public, maybe open it up to members of the American Public Works Association or members of ACEC, each set would probably provide a different set of terms for what is sustainability. When you're using Envision, it provides more of a common language. So you can say this is sustainable because it has fulfilled these different metrics. It has fulfilled these different sustainability indicators. And so it really lays the groundwork and brings everybody onto that same page. And when I say infrastructure industry, I'm talking about all types of infrastructure can use Envision. It was designed as a holistic framework, again, applicable to all types and all sizes of civil infrastructure. So this does include bridges, roads, pipelines, railways, airports, dams, levees, landfills, water treatment systems, and any other components that make up our civil works. Now, I want to pause for a quick question. What is a key type of building or type of construction that we don't see on this list? Can we play what's missing? If you would like to chime in over audio.
Go ahead, Jair. Lindsey, I pinned your video, and I'm wondering if I did that for everyone, or if they're still seeing your slide.
Oh.
I see the slide.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out how to unpin it then. Okay.
I was just gonna say, I don't see housing or like a physical building as infrastructure as a category up there.
Great. So good eye. So to that end, Envision is not designed to evaluate vertical construction. So things that we think of that are exclusively for occupied space. So we're talking hospitals, schools, commercial office space, residences. So you might hear the term vertical construction and horizontal construction, loosely defining civil infrastructure being the horizontal construction, vertical construction being occupied space and buildings of that nature. And so the intention is a broad application to civil infrastructure, where the dominant use of the project is not occupied space. So for example, with a water treatment facility, you might have the administrative building, or you might have some buildings where the operators will work, and the buildings that house the equipment and the process at the plant. But that building is not exclusively for occupied space. That building is there to house the treatment processes, and then likewise the administrative building of that project again is a smaller part of the overall piece of infrastructure. So it can be considered alongside the larger infrastructure project as a component of it. But again, the main takeaway from this slide is that we are looking to apply Envision for all types and sizes of infrastructure projects. However, it's not designed to evaluate exclusively human occupied space. So how does Envision act as a crystal ball? What's the approach? When we developed Envision, we've taken proven strategies that really tackle sustainability challenges head on. And those sustainability challenges could range from, how do we look 100 years into the future? How do we know, the operating environment is ever changing. How do we know what we can do in the future, and how do we know what resources will be available? How do we know what technology will be available? How do we address these sustainability challenges? You think about population growth as another challenge with sustainable infrastructure, and resource use, and how do you balance using resources without depleting resources while also maintaining a quality of life. So thinking of those as some of the challenges that we are facing with the development of our infrastructure systems, Envision takes proven strategies to tackle those challenges. We've wrapped them up with and provided guidance on what we call 64 credits. These 64 credits really represent sustainability and resilience indicators. So this is going back to how we were saying, how do you know it's sustainable? How do you know what sustainability is? This slide provides an overview of our 64 credits across 5 credit categories. So when we're thinking about quality of life, here in quality of life, we're talking about the communities. A lot of you, when we asked what does sustainability mean to you, had community-centric words that you added. So this quality of life section addresses the project's impact on the community, and also the health and well-being of individuals, and the larger well-being of the social fabric of the community as a whole. Then in a leadership category, we're talking about the tasks that demonstrate effective leadership and commitment by all parties involved in a project. So that means we want our owners to be committed, because if we're thinking again for the future, we need to make sure that it's not just the people working on this one project that are committed to sustainable, but we need to make sure that the core of that project, the people that will operate and maintain it, the people that will own that infrastructure, the people that come along and do the next project that is integrated with our sustainable project, we need to understand that they are committed to sustainability as well. And so this leadership category outlines the sustainability indicators that, and really these are the questions that you need to be asking about your project to demonstrate that you do have that meaningful commitment. The resource allocation credit category and the natural world credit category are what I kind of think of as kind of your almost your knee-jerk reactions to what is sustainability. So we think of recycled content, we think of our resource use. So how can we conserve water? How can we conserve energy? We think of our impact on the environment around us. So focusing on resource allocation, we're talking about measuring use of renewable and non-renewable resources for the project. We also threw in some of these credits, across these credits, you'll see an emphasis on monitoring. So again, we're talking about not just for this project, but how do we know once the project is up and running that we are monitoring our water use, for example. And then in addition to that, the natural world credit category allows the project teams to really assess the impact of their project on the environment. So I know environment was a word that popped up in our initial brainstorm as well. This is the section that addresses how to understand and really minimize negative impacts while considering ways that infrastructure can interact and also enhance and restore and work with the environment in a more positive way. And so we'll come back to that word restore on the next slide, but just keep that in mind that we're also looking for ways to restore and enhance. And then the last credit category, climate and resilience, we look at 2 main concepts. So first, minimizing the emissions that may contribute to increased short and long-term risks, and also ensuring that infrastructure projects are resilient to short-term hazards or altered long-term future conditions. So this is the broad strokes overview. I promise I'm not going to simply flash 64 line items to you and then leave it at that. We will come back to a handful of these credits in greater detail towards the end of the presentation. One thing that I wanted to also share with you is one of the unique aspects of the Envision framework, and that is that we really provide opportunities to improve these infrastructure projects across multiple dimensions. So as I alluded to on the previous slide, and in the previous dialogue, we're really looking across all project phases. So not just the planning and design and construction and call it good, but really what is it going to look like and what do we need to have in place and plan for now so that this project can be operated and maintained in a sustainable way. And then the other interesting thing too is can't even call it done once we've considered operations, but what does year 100 look like for this project? What's the end of life going to look like for the project, and how can we make the most of the end of life of the project? We also encourage through this framework project teams to expand their stakeholder collaboration. So looking beyond simply the owner and the core project team, who are the stakeholders that are directly impacted by the project? These are your primary stakeholders. Secondary stakeholders might be stakeholders that are indirectly impacted by the project. So really expanding considerations and bringing these relevant stakeholders into the planning, design, and construction process as well. And then lastly, we recognize that if we're addressing these big challenges with sustainability, success is not going to be all or nothing, and it's going to come in incremental steps. So for each of these sustainability indicators, we have levels of achievement, and these really outline the performance achievement of the project, ranging from improved. So you're making some initial steps, you're learning about how you could be more sustainable, and it's better than the baseline, or it's better than the standard operating procedure. Through superior, you're really making some significant strides to sustainability. Conserving, generally we think of as the project is having a net zero negative impact. So no negative impacts for that sustainability indicator for the project. And then restorative, remember that word restorative that I referred to. We also have, for many of our credits across all of the categories, not just the environmental based categories or the natural world category, prompting teams to look at ways they can restore the project and the community to better than how they found it. So we have restorative to provide some aspirational goals for the project team as well. So again, I wanted to share a few of our tools that we have to implement Envision, and I'll highlight some of the work that is going on in your region as well. So again, everything is wrapped up in the Envision guidance manual, which I'm understanding from your readings this week you are familiar with. This does include the full written framework, including details on all 64 credits in 5 categories. It is also freely available once you create a free account on sustainableinfrastructure.org. We can also talk a little bit at the end of this presentation today, but we also offer complimentary membership to all academics, so full-time academic students and faculty. So we can pause at the end if we have more questions on how to get on board with that. In your ISI account, you'll also get access to some different tools. So we have a pre-assessment checklist, which is a standalone Excel document that you can use to very quickly check yes or no. I think we would fulfill this credit requirement, or no, I don't think we meet the sustainability indicator. It's an offline document, really handy to use in Excel format. We also have an online score sheet where you can create a project, manipulate the score sheet to see how your project is, and track how your project is faring in terms of all of the levels of achievement across the Envision framework. So I wanted to talk also about Envision verification and awards. So any and all projects and often our project teams want to pursue an Envision award so that they can really get recognized and increase awareness for their successful projects. It's also a great way to calibrate your self-assessment. So again, coming back to that, how do we know it's sustainable? We've completed the self-assessment, but now this verification and awards is a third-party verification program so that you have somebody that reviews your self-assessment and says, yes, this is sustainable. You meet the sustainability indicators and requirements to achieve an award. Congratulations. So a little bit, again, we talked about the sectors and the types of infrastructure that Envision applies to. So you can see we've had a significant number of projects in the water and transportation sector, some interesting projects in the waste sector, as well as the food sector. And then we are seeing pretty significant growth in our energy sector as well. I can show kind of the spread. This is only the spread across the US and Canada. We also have a few projects going on more globally, but you can see kind of the spread of where these projects are occurring. So the blue markers are for fully awarded verified projects, and the black markers are where the project team has indicated to us that they do want to pursue verification, but they're not just ready yet. So turning a little bit now to kind of state by state, and we can begin to look at some of project examples from Florida. So we have high project verification in California and New York. And I think what's exciting here for this presentation is that Florida is in third place if we're talking statewide, North American-wide project verification. So great growth and participation in the verification program from the state of Florida. And we can take it on the next few slides. I have a few snapshots of where these projects are in Florida. So the first one that I want to highlight is the Florida DOT's I-4 Ultimate P3 Improvement Project. This earned Envision Platinum in 2017. This, of course, is not the full stretch of I-4, as I'm understanding that's a fairly major thoroughfare, but rather it's, I believe, a 4 to 5 mile stretch of the project that they improved, and it earned Envision Platinum in 2017. Let's see, we also have, here's an example of a water quality project. So this is at a treatment plant in Naples Bay, earning Envision Silver in 2019. And then the Boynton Beach Ion Exchange Resin Plant and East Water Treatment Plant upgrades earned Envision Bronze in 2017 as well. So we see a couple more examples. Florida's hitting all of our major sectors so far. So we've had a couple examples of water, the initial example from the transportation sector. Another transportation sector example is the Miami-Dade County's Park and Ride Terminal Facility, earning Envision Silver most recently in 2020. So that was a great project we saw come through as well. What we're also seeing in Florida that's probably providing such significant growth to how many projects we're seeing come through in Florida is commitment from public sector agencies. So these are Envision supported agencies. And what I mean by that is these are public sector, government sector agencies that have made a commitment to using Envision on their projects, or they have begun using the framework for their projects, and they have at least one credentialed professional on their staff who knows how and is committed to using Envision for more sustainable projects. So that's one thing that's kind of prompting all of the successes that we're seeing, is we're seeing good support from the public sector in Florida as well. So I wanted to pause here for another check-in with you. This one is a little bit more of a quiz, if you will. I know that that term carries some weight in the academic sector, but this is just one question quiz. So head on over to menti.com. I'll flip to the next slide there as well. And you all can, all right. Excellent. Everybody's here so far. I'm going to give it another minute. All right. When I push enter, it's going to start, I think, a 5-second countdown. So look at where you have the Menti, and then you'll see the question. It's the same question that I had on the slide, but you'll have a chance to respond. The faster you respond, the more points you get in this game. And so we'll see who comes out on our leaderboard. All right.
What's the question, Lindsay?
Here is the question. What is an example of a project that would be most appropriate to apply the Envision framework? And it's multiple choice. So is it a water treatment facility, a library, a commercial office, or an elementary school? Let's see how we are.
It's not,
Is it not working?
I don't think so.
I don't see anything.
Let's try it again. Okay. Here we go. All right, it does look like everybody has responded. Let's give it, I put a 30-second timer for the response, but you guys are quick. Excellent. So perfect. It looks like most everyone got the correct answer. And then if we go to our leaderboard, let's see who got it the fastest. A lot of ties. Super. Congratulations, Misty.
Thank you.
Great. So thanks for indulging me in that little interaction and that fun way to have a quick check of the pulse. I think everybody's on the same page with how we use Envision. Here in this section, I think we've discussed much of what I wanted to share in terms of how you can use Envision. What I want to jump to, because I think it will be the most interesting and valuable for this group, is really more get into these credit highlights. So let's talk a little bit about some credit highlights. And so I have a simplified example here that we can think about. So in a project, in an infrastructure project, we might think about material selection. So what, and again, please chime in over audio, what are some of the things that you would traditionally consider if you are trying to select a material for, let's put something tangible on it. Let's say you're trying to select a material for a new water pipeline project. What material, what are your considerations for using that pipe material?
Toxicity of the material.
Good. Toxicity.
Strength for pressure rating.
Strength or pressure rating, that's good.
Weather resistant.
Weather resistant is also good. That might be durability possibly. Good. I think those are some good ideas. I like the toxicity. You're jumping kind of into the beyond traditional, possibly. But traditional considerations might include Durability, so we talked about weather resistance. Strength was mentioned. Cost, so in a traditional consideration, you might be weighing the cost of one material over another. And in maybe an exposed pipeline situation, you might also be considering the aesthetic. So Envision takes these traditional considerations into account while expanding upon them for a more comprehensive understanding of the impact of the selected material. So Envision isn't saying, forget about those traditional considerations. These are the things that you need to consider. We're expanding on traditional considerations. So when we extend these considerations and think more about sustainability, the current narrative around sustainability might prompt you to consider recycled content. That's great. Toxicity was also mentioned. I think that's some great advanced thinking as far as expanding those traditional considerations. Recycled content will certainly contribute to sustainability, as will the source. So where does the material come from location-wise? So how far does it have to travel on the truck in order to get to your job site? So if we extend that further, we can also examine who's supplying the material. So again, think of that leadership category and think of the commitments that we're looking for in terms of sustainability. When we're thinking specifically of resources, we want to know that we're procuring resources from manufacturers that are committed to sustainability as well. And then thinking of also extending that further, this also kind of aligns with where does the material come from? How does it, if it's coming from far away, how does this material fit within the local context? And then lastly, again, thinking of the future, using Envision as our crystal ball, what are the life cycle impacts of the materials? So when considering the material choices, traditionally we might consider a desired aesthetic, we might consider cost, but when we extend that, we can look at the overall fit within the community or the local context. So we also want to consider how our future, again, it can be used in the here and now, but also into the future. So keeping this kind of simplified example in mind, let's take a look at some of the credits so that we can show how the Envision framework can be used to guide these decisions. So I'm going to start with a concept that might be the most familiar, and that's the use of recycled materials. So Envision encourages the use of recycled materials so that we reduce the use of virgin natural resources and also avoid sending otherwise useful materials to the landfill. So here in this credit, we see how Envision encourages sustainability and indicators that are not all or nothing. So you don't have to fully meet 50% from recycled content in order to achieve this credit. But if you're getting at least 5% from recycled content, then we say that's doing something, and we want to encourage that and prompt you to maybe meet the next incremental level. So extending that material selection consideration example a little bit further, let's think more about the supply chain. So here with this credit, RA 1.1, the resource allocation credit category, this is the very first credit in this category, supporting sustainable procurement practices. We're not thinking about the resource anymore, but we're really thinking about the manufacturers that are and the suppliers that are providing those resources, and how are those organizations in and of themselves sustainable. So here is this credit, and we can blow it up and take a look at a couple more things. So in this credit, we see it's less about the material itself and more about the sustainable practices of the supplier. So we have infrastructure projects that we recognize they're major consumers of materials. Owners should consider their ability to influence sustainability performance upstream. So we've seen this in practice with the United States Green Building Councils, if you're familiar with the LEED program. When LEED came out, one of the credits was relevant to toxicity of I'm forgetting the word, toxicity of your adhesives, for example. So do you have VOCs, volatile organic compounds in your paint? Do you have that in your adhesives? And when the lead first came out and said, this is really not such a good idea to have these in, those contractors and procurers were, scrambling around to find something that was affordable. And the low VOC paints were, few and far between. And you had to write very careful specifications as far as what is a low VOC paint. But now you can buy low VOC paint off the shelf at Home Depot. And if you're not, then I don't know what's going on. The low VOC paints are commonplace to the point that they're more prevalent than the high VOC paints, because we understand, and LEED helped prompt that understanding of the general public and of the product manufacturers that this is what's needed. So this credit is, that's a long story to say that this credit is intended to prompt a similar transition. Again, focusing on the suppliers themselves and the selection process, and what's your selection process for your procurer, rather than the material itself. So here, again, we have the levels of achievement, where we're really talking about the percentage of product manufacturers and suppliers for your materials that are protective of human health and the environment, and that also employ sustainable and ethical manufacturing practices. So this is saying, you need to have some selection criteria in place that ensures that these guys are sustainable where you're procuring your materials. And when we say, sustainable, these are the types of things that you should be specifying. So 2 credits that I wanted to use to talk a little bit more about this.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
On the previous slide, where you talk about environmental practices and social responsibility for companies that reflect in this, I'm just wondering if there's a way that having companies document that, they have a gender policy, which I think is something that aligns with social responsibility, or that they have a policy in terms of procurement from diverse suppliers. And I think many organizations are coming up with diverse supplier, procurement practices.
Right.
Is there something that people normally report on?
Yes, that's a great question. Can you still see my screen? I opened the guidance manual.
Yes.
So to answer that question, I did want to take a look at the guidance manual because it provides, and again, it is guidance, it's not prescriptive. So our guidance manual won't say your supplier has to have a gender equality policy, but it will say, here are some examples of qualifying requirements, and they're international standards. So do your suppliers fulfill the ISO requirements for environmental management systems or product specific environmental declarations? So these are just some examples of some criteria that your suppliers could fulfill. This is another one. The Global Reporting Initiative is a little bit more broad as well, and can fulfill, could be looked to fulfill things like gender equity. The other place that we will talk more about equity is in, I don't have it as a deep dive in this presentation, but I'm happy to pull it up, is our, I think we've discussed this one briefly, Maya, the quality of life credit on equity and social justice. So let's pin that as the first thing to hop to. I've got, I'm just keeping an eye on the time because I know I've got just about the hour for you, and I don't want to take up more of your class time than necessary. I have 2 more credit slides to hop through and 1 more interaction, and then if that works out timing wise for you, we can kind of open it up for some questions and some more looks at different credits, if that works.
That would be great. Thanks.
Perfect. So here are two additional credits that I did want to highlight as well. So both from the quality of life credit category, and here we're thinking about the material selection from the aesthetic perspective. So yes, you want your material to look nice. That's, you know, general aesthetics are a good thing when you're considering. Envision expands that. This quality of life credit category, or sorry, credit QL 3.2 talks about and really prompts users to preserve or restore significant historical and cultural sites that are related to resources. And then also preserving views and local character is intended to preserve or enhance the physical and community character of the project. So in considering the desired aesthetic of a material choice and extending that to the local context, we can look to context sensitivity of our designs and consider that in urban settings, a project may want to maintain important views and be designed to reflect the local streetscapes, or material choices or height limitations or other criteria. Whereas if you're in a more rural setting, you may want to preserve the landscape views. And so there's one Envision project that I wanted to highlight here, and that's the Bayonne Bridge National Clearance Program, which earned Envision Silver in 2019. So as a part of this project, Envision supported the design decisions for how to update this historic bridge. So this is a historic bridge between New York and New Jersey. Over, now I'm blanking on the body of water, but Bayonne is the name of the place in New Jersey where it bridges to. And so among other aspects, they recognized that this piece of the bridge did need to be taller because they were looking at raising the bridge to ensure that larger but more efficient cargo ships could pass into the port. And so the project team was considering building a brand new bridge. So deconstructing this bridge and just erecting a brand new bridge that would be more modern and more up to date and allow larger, more efficient cargo boats to enter the port, or deciding to actually update the old structure. So the majority of this bridge structure is the original structure. You can see the roadway had previously gone from here to here. Oops, I'll come back. Let's see. Here to here, the project team decided to simply raise the roadway and maintain that original structure. Because the historical aspect was certainly important to the local community. So in this next slide, we can see that this design decision did have cascading effects on material selection and was also further supported by other credits in the Envision credit category. So the project preserved as much of the original bridge as possible, including this original steel arch. And this strategy also helped the project reduce their carbon footprint by minimizing the need to create or manufacture new structural materials for the project. So I did want to wrap with one final slide before we turn over to our Q&A, and we can also open our Q&A up while you all are thinking about the response to this question. But think about, how will you use Envision? So how are you going to, what's the next thing that you're going to do tomorrow? I mean, what's your homework? But what's the next thing that you're going to do next week? What can you plan to do in October or November? And then also think about, how do you want to use Envision? How do you want to carry this forward next year? Where would you like to be with your Envision exploration next year? Maybe that is having used the checklist to evaluate a project. Maybe that is earning your Envision sustainability credential. I know we didn't talk a lot about that one, but what are the things that you can target for yourself? So head over to menti.com and input your thoughts there, and I'm happy to open it up to Q&A now. We'll let those come in, and we can come back and kind of take a look at those afterwards. Great. I am seeing some good stuff come in. While those are coming in, and we'll let those float on in, actually, while those are coming in, let's talk about, because I know I know equity and social justice are important topics for this group. It came up frequently in that initial brainstorming. So let's take a look at how Envision really just begins to address equity and social justice. And one thing that we definitely learned when we were creating and revising the framework. So what you're looking at here is Envision B3. So we recognized that when we were transitioning and revising the framework between Envision version 2 and this Envision version 3, we recognized that a glaring gap in the framework was truly tackling equity and social justice. So while we recognize that that this credit may just be scratching the surface, we also provide guidance to our users, to Envision users in that regard, and providing the guidance to them to say, you know, there's always work to be done in terms of creating equitable futures. It's never one and done. It's never, okay, like, great, we're equitable now because of what we did on this project, but again, asking the right questions, providing the right guidance to begin to have those conversations and to begin to make significant strides. So for this particular credit, we're talking about so some things that you can see in the improved level of achievement, and this mirrors the improved level of achievement for many of the credits where it's scratching the surface, beginning to learn more about the issues. So what are the issues that are impacting your community? How do you know that you have all of the issues accounted for? Do you have, you know, starting with stakeholder engagement, have you talked to the right stakeholders? How do you assess, and, you know, can you assess the social impacts? How do you make, and then here, this might be a little bit more to your previous question, Maya, of as a foundational requirement for this credit, we do look to see that key members of the project team make institutional comments. So who do we think of when we think of key members of the project team? I think that's spelled out either in this credit or another credit, but certainly the project owner, the project consultants, the major sub-consultants that are delivering on this project are making those commitments, and we've put that as foundational for the levels of achievement.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
When people are submitting information, background information to support, like, let's say they were going for an enhanced, and so they had to provide, you know, something showing that they had stakeholder engagement and all these sorts of things. What kinds of documentation do they put?
Oh, good question.
To show that the community, you know, the right people in, like, the broad section of the community has signed off and supported stuff. Great.
For each of these criteria, A through G for this particular credit, they're detailed with what exactly the project team needs to provide to demonstrate that. So when we're talking about stakeholder engagement process, so do you have a document that demonstrates you have this understanding of the historic context? Do you have documentation of how equity and social justice inform the stakeholder engagement process? So we're looking for documentation, whether that might be meeting minutes or a meeting roster or a list of stakeholders and their affiliations and their relevance to the project. And so so the documentation, here's some more specific documentation that we look for. So how are you, what does your assessment include? How are you providing an assessment? What's the documentation? And are you covering these 3 aspects? So this is just one aspect of the documentation that we look for with this to fulfill this one piece of that initial.
Okay. And is there a way then for, because when you have controversial projects, like I've seen where, the large companies sort of have stakeholder meetings, but they're not really like proper engagement meetings, and there's a section of the population that's not been included. And normally I would think your verifier wouldn't know these things. And so they're just based on sort of what the company is putting. So how does, a community that does not support something engage with this process? Is there a way?
That's a good question. That's a good question. And I think 2 things. One, I've seen the documentation, not for this credit, but I've seen documentation for for credits in V2 where we're looking for stakeholder engagement, and the verifier can tell. So if we ask the project team to submit a roster of who's involved in the project, the verifier can tell how comprehensive the stakeholder engagement is from the documentation submitted. And if it doesn't meet the standards that we're expecting, if it's full of holes or it's limited stakeholder engagement, then the verifier can tell and can decline or can provide that commentary. As far as wholly controversial projects, so this question has been raised before. Would Envision, what if the North Dakota pipeline applied for Envision verification? Would it be allowed to do that? And so we have checks and balances in place, one of them being the initial prerequisites for Envision verification, where we do, and staff does our due diligence to indicate or to identify, is this a controversial project for reasons like that. So there's checks and balances in place in that regard as well.
Okay. That's something that, I've been thinking of. I saw Chrisanne had her hand up.
Yes, but my question was answered. So my initial question was in terms of how is Envision defining what stakeholder engagement is? Is it attending a meeting where you just present your project? Is it more meaningful where the community can actually be involved in the actual goal setting and things along that line? Or what exactly does stakeholder engagement mean?
Great question. And let's take a look at another question. And I saw there was another hand raised.
Madeline,
we will come to you. I'm thinking of so one of the core stakeholder engagement and really foundational stakeholder engagement credits is LD 1.3. So for this credit, we'll have a quick peek at this one to say, to show how Envision lays out what you should be doing with your stakeholder engagement. So it starts again with, we want active engagement. We want you to first identify your primary and secondary stakeholders. So use this stakeholder mapping process. And so this is the credit, Maya, that I was alluding to, where, if they don't have even this documentation from we know that this stakeholder engagement process has not been thorough enough. So, who are the people that are directly impacted by your project? Who are the people that are indirectly impacted by your project? Have you mapped them all out? And again, that's at the very foundational level of achievement here. And then as far as engagement and this two-way street of communication, to address the project teams that want to say, oh yeah, we're doing stakeholder engagement. We have a website and we have quarterly public meetings, but at those public meetings they drone on for the presentation, nobody's allowed to voice their concern. Or, oh yeah, we did public sector engagement, we sent some flyers around. Like, those are evidently very much not two-way streets of communication and stakeholder engagement, and that's guidance is provided here on how to really increase the engagement and increase the flow of information with your stakeholder process.
Madeline, thanks, Lindsey.
Hey, Lindsey. So I have two questions actually. So the first one is how is Envision marketed and how do different companies who are doing projects find out about it? And the second one is if you can apply Envision to past projects as well.
Good question. Good question. I'm going to take the easier one first. So yes, you can apply Envision retroactively, and we do see that as a common use of the Envision framework. Our threshold is the project cannot be more than 3 years constructed. So beyond that 3-year mark, we've seen that that the documentation isn't as robust as it needs to be in order to successfully pursue Envision verification. So once you're, so you can apply for Envision verification anytime within that post-construction 3-year window. As far as marketing, that's a great question. We are, a lot of our foundational marketing stems from really grassroots uptake of the framework. So ISI staff working with public sector agencies in major cities to get the ball rolling and get some larger commitments. We also turn to our credential holders, so our ENBSPs, to be the advocates for the framework by saying, I know about this framework, and recommending it to their clients or recommending it to their peers for infrastructure projects. Right. So it's a lot of peer-to-peer marketing. We also are, market through our founders and our founders network. So the American Society of Civil Engineers has a very broad framework, or sorry, a very broad membership. Likewise, the American Public Works Association, is the membership organization for all public works and public sector agencies. So with their promoting it to their membership as well, we're able to gain some traction.
Okay, thank you. Just another follow-up question. So I guess if just the general public and community members know about Envision, have you seen where hey, they recommend Envision for a project, and have you seen that take foot on a project just based off recommendations?
That's a great question. And it also, and I'm saying that to all of these, and I mean that honestly, these are some of the best questions that I've received after an intro presentation like this. So props to this class, asking really smart questions.